In this video, I'm going to be going through every single 5th level bard spell to help you make the best decisions for your bard. Let's get into it. Starting off, we have Animate Objects. So Animate Objects is from the old school philosophy of conjuring, which is to summon either a couple big ones or a whole swarm of little creatures. And it struggles with some things, adds 10 extra creatures to the board, which I do feel like does take away from the game when we have to place 10 individual creatures, we have to roll 10 individual dice. It can slow down the game a lot, so we need to be careful with it. However, if you just kind of treat your swarm as a swarm, you roll your dice quick, this one you can kind of get away with, and its upcasting doesn't multiply on each upcast. It just simply adds 2 new objects, which as the spell is written is 2 new small objects. If it's a medium, then it becomes 2 objects, so a medium counts as 2. So the way it's written, it doesn't break the game as you're upcasting it. So it does have some of the issues that, say, Conjure Animals has, but they're not to the same extent. It's a far more manageable spell. And with that being said, it is a good spell. And this gives bards some summoning, which bards normally don't get. They can get it here and there, magical secrets of course, but they don't have a ton of summoning. So this is actually pretty nice for that. It's a spell I don't know if I personally would use often just because I don't love the mechanics, but I think it is a pretty dang good spell, and if the mechanics don't bother you or your DM, have a lot of fun with it. Awaken is a weird spell with some pretty interesting implications for the D&D world. So you have to spend 1,000 gold pieces in material components. They are consumed. You then spend 8 hours either awakening a plant or an animal. When it's awakened, you give it a human-like intelligence, and then it's basically your slave for 30 days until you or your party wounds it or hurts it or shows it aggression, in which case it can leave. And if you are friends with it for 30 days, it might become your friend long term. But it's basically like getting an animal companion for 30 days, just a really long time, and that may or may not stay afterwards. So this power level can vary wildly. How easy is it for you to get 1,000 gold? You can make a whole bunch of these and have a little army, which of course would annoy me as well as many other DMs. So I would suggest probably keeping it to 1 and then having your 1 companion run around with you. Kind of like a familiar, but more of an animal companion from like the Ranger subclass. So it's pretty cool. It opens up some unique possibilities, and its power level is going to vary pretty wildly. So yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty interesting and fun spell. So Dominate Person's up next, and Dominate Person is best used out of combat. Once you do have somebody dominated, they are dominated. It's really difficult for them to do anything you don't want them to do. It only lasts a minute. And then in combat, whenever they're hit, they get to remake the saving throw. So if you can start out the combat with an ally that you've dominated, try and protect them from getting hit. Archers, spellcasters, those are going to be the best because they can kind of hang out in the back, stay protected, and continue helping the fight indirectly. And then once they do take damage and you lose them, well, then they're going to be your enemy once more. So melee-based dominated people aren't as good as range-based dominated people. I think Dominated Person really shines though as the utility solve many issues spell. I don't think of this as a combat winning spell. I think about this as best interrogation spell, best get an item spell. You know, you can really simplify a lot of the challenges D&D offers with Dominate Person. So Dream is a really cool and flavorful spell. It can act as a form of communication, and it's also one of the only spells that can actively interrupt a long rest and stop them from getting the benefits of a long rest. So say you have a boss fight that ends in a draw, and they retreat and you retreat, you can end your day by casting Dream and potentially stopping them from getting a long rest. You guys take a long rest and then you go find them and re-engage. So it's pretty crazy what you can do with this, but how often it's going to come up in a campaign. Not to mention that I was talking about, you know, that stalemate you broke apart and now you have this 5th level spell at the end of the day. Well, maybe it wouldn't have been a stalemate if you had used your 5th level spell to win that fight. So it's kind of hard to get the most out of Dream, but it is a spell I really like. And I said that it can be used for communication, but there's cheaper forms of communication. Sending, for example. I love it. I love its flavor, and I probably would take this spell more than it is justified to be taken. I'd put it somewhere as your fun utility. It's not going to be your premier utility, but it is fun enough to take anyways. Next up is Geas. Never knew how to pronounce that, but one of our commenters actually clued me in on how to pronounce it. It's not Geas, it's Geas. So basically with Geas, you target a creature and for 30 days, you give it an order. This order can be like, hey, do this service, or actively work towards this, or don't do this. And if they disobey, then they take a chunk of 5d10 psychic damage. Once they take that damage, they can't take it again for the rest of the day, so they can act however they want, and then the next day it resets. Remove Curse, Greater Restoration, or Wish can just remove the Gish. So I find Gish to be more of a DM spell because that 5d10 psychic damage isn't much at the levels you can cast this. You're 9th level when you can cast this. So on average, you're taking a little bit above 25 points of damage to interrupt the Gish. And so at its worst, it's an inconvenience for a 9th level player, but for weaker players, this is a good way for a mage to incentivize them to do things. It's kind of a way of railroading in-game that they still have the choice. There's just a consequence to breaking that choice. So as a bard, when I'm hitting 9th level, am I taking Gish? No, almost never. I just don't think its utility application is strong enough to ever justify it as a bard. But as a DM, I can see use cases where I would use it. Greater Restoration, a pretty staple support-based spell. If no one on your team has it, you should probably take it. Someone on your team has it, consider taking it, but you don't necessarily have to. Because if you think about it, a cleric who takes Greater Restoration, it's a much smaller commitment than a bard. A bard has to hard commit to their spells, a cleric can just take it for a day. And there are a lot of effects that Greater Restoration takes care of that could have waited a day anyways. So yeah, again, much better on a cleric, but if no one on your party has it, take it. We have Hold Monster, which is Hold Person, excepting it can target someone other than humanoids. Hold Monster is a solid spell. It's not insane. The reason it's not insane is because they get the multiple saves and they can resist the initial save as well. However, you keep someone paralyzed for 2 turns and they're probably dead because everyone's getting crits on them. Those crits do a lot of damage, so this spell gets better the more marshals you have on your squad. 5th level is a pretty high level spell to be targeting a single person though, when you can be hitting multiple people. But as far as single target spells go, not bad. So Legend Lore, it costs 250 gold and components to cast. So there is a cost to it, and then it takes 10 minutes to cast. But once you've cast it, it's essentially, hey DM, tell me a story in a spell. You look at an item, person, place, object, whatever, and you say, tell me some history about this. And the DM has to either make it up on the spot or tell you the history that already exists for it. Now, an interesting line in Legend Lore, it says if the thing you named isn't of legendary importance, you gain no information. So the spell is designed specifically for like historical relics or really big things. And how you're going to know that from just a normal item, I don't know. Are you going to really commit to a 5th level spell that may or may not come up at all through the whole campaign? Probably not. Legend Lore falls in the category of spells I might consider giving to my bard for free. As a bard, I'm never taking this, but it has enough flavor and interesting things going for it that I might swing that way. Next up is Mass Cure Wounds, which is just a straightforward party heal. Heals 6 creatures, 3d8 plus your spellcasting modifier, so it's a bit of burst healing. Keep in mind that the more people you have, the more value you're going to get out of this. If you have a small party, this probably isn't going to be super worth it. Think about it as 20 HP per person around that. So if you have 6 people, that can be 120 HP. That's probably worth a 5th level spell. If you have 2 people, it's 40 HP. Probably not. So this one's taken with a grain of salt and really needs to be analyzed with you and the rest of your party. Next up is Mislead. Mislead is the total Loki spell, if you ask me. You're like walking, and then all of a sudden an illusion of you continues walking, and you turn invisible at the same time. So you have this illusion you can control and invisibility into one spell. And what's really great about it is that, you can be getting captured or something, and you can just fade away. It's a really cool spell. I love the flavor of this spell. Invisibility is good, right? 2nd level spell, you go invisible, gives you a free disengage. Well, this lets you do that, but now there's an illusion there that looks exactly like you where you were, and so it'll probably tank an attack as well. Is that worth a 5th level spell instead of a 3rd? Is it better than greater invisibility at 4th? Debatable, but I think there's enough use application here for it to at least be interesting. I put this definitely in the fun utility and maybe even the good utility. I think Modify Memory is such a bard spell that you can just get away with shenanigans and then modify their memory so they don't remember a thing. They can forget that shameful night, for example. I love this spell. I think it creates such amazing moments. Like, if you guys haven't seen Critical Role Campaign 2, Jester with the Hag and Modify Memory was classic. So this spell is automatically going to be high up on my very interested list. It's definitely in the fun utility and potentially in the good utility, depending on your DM and how it's used. I think this really rewards a creative player, but it definitely is utility. This isn't a fight winning spell, so you have to think outside the box with this one, but there's a lot of value in this spell. I see the most value in it for just how fun it is and what kind of storytelling opportunities it presents. Planar Binding, you need to spend a jewel worth 1,000 gold pieces to use this, and you're essentially trying to bind a creature to your will. Now, getting this to work is actually really tricky. You probably should have one of your allies summon a creature and you cast this right away. So it lasts for an hour, Planar Binding lasts for an hour. You know, depending on your DM, some DMs will be like, oh, it missed it by a second, super dumb. Just let them do it. So yeah, have your wizard cast summon elemental, and now you can bind an elemental to you, so on and so forth, and now you don't have to concentrate on the summon. So it's a way of adding an extra party member to your group for 1,000 gold. Kind of like Awaken, except you can have a lot more control over what you bind to you, considering that you're probably summoning it. It's a tricky spell to make work though. If it's a creature that wants to kill you, you have to put it in a magic circle, and hopefully it's only melee because they can attack outside the magic circle. A whole bunch of things can go wrong here. And it's kind of a good thing that a whole bunch of things can go wrong, because if this was an easy spell to cast, it would be really broken. So I still allow this spell just because they have to go through so many hoops to make it work. But once you finish the spell, you just got yourself another party member, so it is very powerful. Raise Dead is bad Revivify. Yes, you can do it for longer, so instead of 1 minute, you have 10 days, but then it brings them back with 3 points of exhaustion. And the thing about Raise Dead, again, once you have a cleric, it's pointless. So definitely don't take this if you have a cleric, because if they can't Revivify within the minute, they can just sleep the next day, wake up, take the Raise Dead spell, and then raise somebody. So it's a 0 take with a cleric. It's a maybe if you don't have a cleric, because yeah, maybe you can't get to them within 1 minute, but you have to weigh that option, because Revivify, if you get to them within 1 minute, you're good. But with Raise Dead, even if you get to them within 1 minute, now they have 3 points of exhaustion, which is pretty devastating. So there's a give and a take between the two, and you have to decide. Rary's Telepathic Bond is a fantastic ritual cast, and as a ritual caster, this is a dang near must take in my book once you hit 5th level. It's not going to cost you any spell slots, and it's really going to give your team a whole bunch of utility, because you can all telepathically communicate with one another. And that's huge for when combats get complicated and you're moving across fields, and you need to be silent and sneak. Super fantastic. Scrying is an information gathering spell, which are always hard to quantify, but I do tend to like them more than most. I think if you have the best information, then you make the best decisions. Once we're hitting 5th level though, it's pretty high cost to do an information gathering spell. But this is pretty cool what you can do with this, because you can listen in on meetings, track people, all sorts of things, look at locations that you want to check in on, check on friends. There's a lot to do with this that are fun and flavorful. But just make sure you have your fight-winning spells in order before taking this. I put this in the interesting to good utility category. Seeming is a mass disguise self, so you can make your whole party look like various people. I think it's really great. Social infiltration is probably my favorite kind of infiltration, but it's often only able to be done by a few players. This allows it to be done by many, and it's just one of those spells I like, definitely in the fun utility category once again. Skill Empowerment gives proficiency and expertise in a skill, and it does for 1 hour so long as you continue concentrating. This isn't a bad spell, but it is pretty freaking expensive, especially once you consider that you have to commit one of your spells known to this as a bard. I just can't see myself getting enough out of this to ever take, so I put it in kind of the bad utility category. Synaptic Static is basically a psychic fireball that also debuffs without concentration. The debuff is a saving throw, and if they fail it, now they have to roll a d6. It's basically like Bane, but a little bit different because it's a d6 instead. It's attack rolls, skill checks, and the only saving throw that they lose that d6 on is concentration-based saving throws, which is really good. It's just crazy good. It's a fight-winning spell without concentration, which there are very few of those in the game. This is the premier 5th level spell, if you ask me, and you basically get fireball damage with it on top of it. It just doesn't do anything bad. It's just a fantastic spell. Teleportation Circle is a mass transport, and it really needs to be built into the world. There needs to be other teleportation circles around to really get the main benefit out of this, and as a DM, you really should be considering putting teleportation circles in your world so that this is usable. Really good transportation spell. Now this wraps up the Bard's 5th level spell, and I gotta be honest, I don't think there's a huge power spike when it comes to your 5th level spells. I will say that there are a ton of fun spells in the 5th level spell list. with some standouts. I think Synaptic Static is the standout fight-winning spell among this group, and probably the only one I would consider a true fight-winning spell. Teleportation Circle gives your team world mobility, which someone is going to need to pick that up at some point, so if nobody else is, you might as well pick it up now. The standout utility here is Rary's Telepathic Bond, but then you get a whole bunch of interesting utilities throughout. Mislead, Modify Memories, Legend Lore, all really fascinating spells that aren't necessarily powerhouses, they're just really cool storytelling tools. I love those. And then you get a Summon and Animate Objects, which is something that the bard really lacks and is quite good. You do round yourself out a little bit, but whereas every other spell I'd say it really represents fight-winning spells or it represents your emergency button, here I would say it represents character-defining choices. More story-based than power-based. But anyways, that's just my take on the bard's 5th level spells. How about yours? Let me know in the comments down below. Anything I missed, anything you agree or disagree on, I'd love to hear it. I have either already talked about or am going to talk about everything bard, down to the fine details. So if you're interested in that playlist, check it out here. We've also done a bit of a deep dive, not as detailed, but a deep dive on the cleric subclasses that you can check out here. But other than that, I just hope you have yourselves a wonderful day, and I'll see you on the next one. Later.